People already joining in on today's live stream. Be sure and hit that like button when you join in on today's live stream. By hitting that like button, the YouTube algorithm will pick up the video, spread it around for more people to join in, and it's always a lot more fun to have people asking interesting questions and putting interesting comments there in the comment section. So today we're going to be talking about how it is or why it is that the economists out there seem so confused about what it is that's going on. I was just reading an article coming out of Davos, and some of the people over there are describing what it is that they feel is going to be coming from the Federal Reserve going into the future, mainly talking about those interest rate adjustments, and believing that the inflationary scenario that is going to come from the credible threats of tariffs, or what the possible tariff implication could be, will start raising that inflationary scenario, which would then in turn put a pressure on the Federal Reserve to then not adjust rates down as much as people would have anticipated, although there is still the belief that they are going to be going down going into the future, like mainly in 2025, but that they're not going to be cutting as much. And so this is a pretty common thing to hear out there on the mainstream media, to hear it somewhat similar to just like that the credible threat of tariffs or the idea of an inflationary pressure coming to the future would then limit the amount of interest rate cuts that the Federal Reserve could actually do. And this is how most people would see it, that inflation, employment, that this is what they're mainly focused on, and why it is that they are keeping the interest rates where they are, or why it is that they may not cut as much or have to even raise going into the future. But that's what their people are focused in on. That's what the economists are focused in on. It's what the mainstream media is focused in on. It's what everybody seems to be focused in on, right? Inflationary pressures due to tariffs or, immigration, whatever. There's all kinds of stuff out there. But that's what they're focused in on. What very, very, very few people actually take into consideration is what's happening with the neutral interest rate. No articles can I find on that. Not coming from Davos, not coming from the, fancy economists out there on YouTube, not at the mainstream media. Really, nobody out there is discussing what's going on with the neutral interest rate and how the Federal Reserve is conducting themselves in relation to the neutral interest rate. And again, this is something that I have tried to share out here on YouTube. So many videos, right? Going on for years now, talking about how the neutral interest rate being very close to zero limited the Federal Reserve in their ability to conduct themselves with their monetary policy through interest rate adjustments. It wasn't working for them anymore. And I know this is hard to kind of wrap your head around if it's new information for you, but the Federal Reserve absolutely desperately needed an inflationary scenario that was well elevated in order to raise the neutral interest rate. By raising that neutral interest rate, the Federal Reserve was able to gain ammunition. Now, I know this again is very difficult to wrap your head around, but the higher the neutral interest rate goes, the more that the Federal Reserve can drop interest rates well below neutral in order to stimulate the economy. But if neutral is very close to zero, the Federal Reserve doesn't have any room to move. And this is what they have been facing up until COVID. I mean, the great financial crisis, quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4, the zero interest rate policy, all that stuff right there was destroying the Federal Reserve's monetary policy of interest rate adjustments for stimulating the economy. They developed a new form of tool. Their words, the forward guidance, right? The future credible threats, the signaling. That's what ended up becoming the Federal Reserve's main policy tool, and they're still using it today. That is only able to be done so long as the people are incredibly confused about the future. They have no idea if the Fed is going to go up, down, or sideways or whatever. This gives the Federal Reserve the most power with their words, because the more that they push the belief into a particular direction, whether it would be positive or negative, the more of an outcome that will actually have within the markets. Their interest rate adjustments themselves are not the important profound tool, right? It's their words on it. And with the words and the future expectations of what is coming with credible threats of tariffs or whatever it is that, is running through the media at the time, if you can create that feeling of fear, or I don't know how, it's not even necessarily fear, just that absolute certainty, right? That this is going to happen. People will then conduct themselves in a way that actually creates that environment. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so when I think about what it is that the Federal Reserve truly needs out of this market, out of the economy, out of the people, is they need them to have an elevated inflation expectation. Whether we actually get the inflation or not, that's a different story, right? And I understand that's really important to a lot of people, especially those who are living paycheck to paycheck. The inflationary scenario is very damaging and painful for them. But we also have to understand it, that the Federal Reserve was needing this to take place. They needed it out of you. They knew that they were going to be inflicting a lot of pain and suffering upon the people. They knew it. They admitted it a long time ago. We brought it up many times in Jerome Powell's speech from August of 2020. I mean, if go and read it yourself, right? Again, it was August 27th, 2020. Jerome Powell gave a speech, and he said that the inflationary pressure hits the people at the lowest income, right? The lowest job, or the lowest income earners, I think is the way he phrased it as. He knew that it was going to hit them the most. However, if they didn't do it, they was going to destroy their monetary policy. He he didn't use those words, but I mean, really, if you read it, that's essentially what he was saying. And so understanding that the key to all of this, all of it, is to raise the neutral interest rate. If the neutral interest rate can move away from zero and move up to ever closer to the elevated Fed funds rate, every time that neutral interest rate ticks up off of the inflation expectation, it makes the economy less restricted. You think about it, the Fed above the neutral interest rate is the restriction upon the economy. If they're below the neutral interest rate, that's stimulating to the economy. So being well above the neutral interest rate with an elevated inflation expectation that begins to raise the neutral interest rate, the economy becomes less restricted. We see what appears to be a resilient economy, the soft landing, right? This is how a lot of people have missed it, is because they are not looking at what it is that the Federal Reserve truly needed for their monetary policy, which is that neutral interest rate to be elevated. The only way you can get that elevated in neutral interest rate is to have an elevated inflation expectation. And it's working. It's working for the Federal Reserve. Nobody sees it this way because nobody explains it this way. I understand that I'm like the only one. I cannot leave you a link to anybody else who is sharing this information the way I am, because nobody else is sharing the information like I am. And it's not something that I'm making up. This is all information that I got directly from the Federal Reserve itself, following their speeches, their words, their strategies. I mean, if you want to Google it for yourself, type in Federal Reserve makeup strategy, for the fact that they had to make up the makeup strategy was the fact that they had to make up for the fact that they were below the neutral interest, or below the inflation rate, for the previous 10 years. Right? Quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4 failed to produce the inflationary scenario the Fed was looking for. The makeup strategy is trying to deal with that. Right? And nobody knows this. And I don't get it. I don't get why. I don't understand. This is like communication coming directly from the Fed. You think all these people who pay attention to the Federal Reserve, they're so focused in on every single thing that the Fed says, but yet they don't seem to understand that or know this information. I don't understand why. It is not hidden, right? It's not hidden anywhere out there. It's readily available for everybody to read. However, nobody seems to have internalized it, but yet they seem to regurgitate all the same BS that is now being poured out there on the mainstream media. This seems to be what everybody looks at and pays attention to. And when I think about that, that is what the Federal Reserve is using for their main monetary policy tool, is that narrative, controlling that particular narrative. If people were talking out there on the mainstream, other YouTube channels talking about the information that I am talking about the makeup strategy, flexible average inflation targeting, the neutral interest rate, all these things, if they were talking about it regularly, the Federal Reserve would not be able to conduct themselves the way they are. I mean, people all the time say, how is it that we end the Fed? How is it that we destroy the Fed? You do it by spreading the information that I am trying to spread. Because if everybody was to internalize this, they wouldn't be able to do it. It just wouldn't work anymore. You know, I mean, even the idea of blaming Powell in itself, right? And like, if you put Powell's name up, Powell did blah blah blah, 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 right? Right there, already, that is what the Federal Reserve needs from you in order for them to be successful at what it is that they are doing. The moment that somebody starts to look at Powell and start to blame Powell for anything that's going on, that right there is the energy that the Federal Reserve needed from you for them to be successful. And this is so crazy to think. I understand that from a lot of people out there who hear that, they go like, dude, you're losing your mind. It's not. Right? It's not. The Federal Reserve needed an elevated inflation expectation out of the people. They didn't care how they got it. We have that elevated inflation expectation right now. They are in the background giving each other high fives. Jerome Powell was not the creator of the idea. He is not the one who's in charge. He is merely a spokesperson. He speaks on behalf of the FOMC, who is 12 or 11 voting members with 5 alternates and 2 alternatives and 2 advisors. Right? This is the people who create monetary policy. Jerome Powell just speaks about it. That's it. You shoot him, you shoot a messenger. That's it. Nothing changes. Right? So to blame Jerome Powell for anything is a lack of understanding what is truly happening within our monetary policy, and what you are doing is falling right in line with what it is that the Federal Reserve needs you to believe for them to continue on with their operations. It's sad to think, but that's true. All right, stop pressuring me to hit the like button. Hit the like button, Jim. Go hit the button right now. We got 48 likes right now. If it ain't 49, it's your fault. All right. Is the 10-year Treasury rate indicative of where the neutral interest rate is currently sitting or hovering around at? I don't believe that's a good indication of where the neutral interest rate is. The neutral interest rate has estimates that is created by the Federal Reserve. They refer to it as R star. Now, again, this is a very obscured way of trying to understand where the neutral interest rate is, because really the neutral interest rate can't be observed in real time. It's like observed over time. Like you can look back at it and say, okay, well, the neutral interest rate was here or there. But as far as where it is exactly at this moment, nobody can really tell. So if you want to know like where the neutral interest rate is, you can kind of follow the Federal Reserve's estimates of it, and they refer to that as R star. I think that the U.S. 10-year gives an impression of what it is that people are feeling about the economy and the demand for return on capital that they are looking for. So basically, they don't want to lend their money out unless they get a return that is going to be that of adequacy to fight inflation. So basically, they don't want to give up their money and then lose their purchasing power over time. The 10-year Treasury is a pretty good sign of where it is that people are demanding that return for their capital investments, where it is that they need the interest or to be rewarded for lending out their money in an uncertain time. So the 10-year Treasury, whatever direction that is going, I think is the feeling coming from the market participants. When you see that yield rising dramatically in a quick fashion, like all of a sudden you see the yields rise, to me that is probably a sign of being oversold, right? Especially if it happens very quickly. It just like any kind of market move, you know, there's dramatic swings that happen. To me, that's like, you know, panic selling that may be happening or something of that nature. So following the 10-year Treasury in a quick move, like over the course of a week, may not be as telling as like watching it over the course of months or even years. All right, moving on. Wayne says, I bought a course 25 years ago, found it unopened in a building at a rental property I now occupy. I just went and bought a rental and learned the old-fashioned way. The Fed has no control over interest rates beyond the overnight as long as the government is reckless. Fiscal policies continue, rates will stay high. Too much risk. I don't know. I mean, I think they have some control over the interest rates when they start moving into quantitative easing and promising to buy up a bunch of treasuries. I mean, that has a tendency to lower rates, drives up the price of the bonds and lowers rates. So, I mean, when they say that they have no control over it, I don't think that's exactly the case. I think quantitative easing gives them some sort of like direction in which that those things can go. Granted, it's like usually the market participants itself that are front running the Federal Reserve in that sense, that is ultimately bringing in the buyers and lowering the yields. But still, I mean, that's, some, like, I wouldn't call it control, but good influence. I don't know. All right, who knows the song Ken Lee by Mariah Carey? All right, hello everyone, happy Unicorn Promise Day. Unicorn Promise Day. What does that mean? Alright. If only someone sold a course of how to accumulate and maintain rental properties, make life so much easier. Deanna, doesn't Lumberjack Landlord do that? I think all those guys do. All right, UE, is today the start of a golden age, roaring 20s 2.0? Why would today be any different from yesterday? Because some dude's in power now, right? Like, here's the funny thing about it is that I learned a long time ago that there is nobody, literally nobody outside of yourself who can do anything for you. And I mean, there's probably people out there who might offer you an opportunity or something of that nature. But what it comes down to is there's nobody out there. There's nobody. Like, literally, it's you. And if you're looking for like some savior out there who's going to come around and be like the leadership that's going to like make it all awesome for everybody or something like that, that dude doesn't exist. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I don't think so anyway. I mean, maybe it does for you, but that doesn't exist for me. There's nobody out there who is going to do anything for me that's going to be any better than what it is that I could possibly do for myself. And so I just don't look to leadership to do anything. Like, I just don't think that they can do it for me. And even if they did do it for me, it's probably not going to be right for you. So how could I expect leadership to do something that is going to be appropriate for me, but then not expect it to be appropriate for you? Like, that doesn't seem right. So I don't expect it for me. I don't expect them to do anything for me at all, period. Like, in fact, the more I can get them out of my life, the better I feel about it. All right. The Fed's policy has been inflationary since 1913. Just look at the value of the USD since then. Jeff, okay, so here's the thing. Like, I would take into consideration just for a moment before you take that into your like hardcore belief, because you're right. I mean, it's very factual. Here's the thing. You also have to take into consideration that the Federal Reserve had lost their ability to conduct themselves with their monetary policy, and the fact that they were able to create an environment that returned their monetary policy back to them, and it was due to an elevated inflationary scenario. You might want to consider that. Ben Bernanke did a speech called Deflation and How to Prevent It from Ever Occurring Here. In that speech, he described credible threats. He described quantitative easing. He described these things that they could use if the monetary policy was to have failed. We have experienced all those things that Ben Bernanke was talking about. Deflation is by far their biggest scare, not inflation. In fact, inflation is what they needed the people to feel and believe and expect in order to save the monetary policy. Every time I read a comment like, they're destroying the dollar, they're doing that, they're printing, they're all the other stuff, and I'm thinking, you're falling right in line with what they need you to believe. That's exactly what they wanted from you. All right? You think about it. At the end of the Trump administration, he said that there was no inflation, the Fed should be printing money, and going into negative interest rates. Germany was doing it right by having negative interest rates. This is what Donald Trump was saying at the end of his last administration. Okay? I mean, I understand why. I knew back then that it didn't make sense, except that it was a perfect, credible threat. It lowered the inflation expectation and it raised the real interest rates at the time. That's what the whole goal of that statement was. Firing Jerome Powell, trying to take Fed funds into negative territory, printing of money, all that other stuff. It was all credible threats so that the people's inflation expectation would fall and the real interest rates would rise. They pulled it off perfectly. Okay? Once you see it this way and you understand it for the reasonings behind it, like everybody wants to look at it in a different fashion. They want to look at it like New World Order kind of objective. Like they're planning on coming down and destroying everybody and destroying our ways of life and taking everything and keeping you enslaved and keeping you debt slaved and all this other stuff. And like all these things are true. Like I'm not trying to deny any of that stuff. It's all true, right? The problem that most people end up facing is that by looking at it that way and then believing it that way, you have a very difficult time of seeing it any other way, right? And I know that was my problem. That was one of the biggest problems that I had faced up until the point that I decided that I was going to start changing things in the way that I not only looked at and viewed the world, but then the way I was conducting myself in general. And once I came to that realization that the New World Order is not coming down to kill me unless I give it that meaning. And if I do give it that meaning, that's exactly what will happen. So I don't give it that meaning anymore. I don't look at it that way. I look at everything that's happening and I say, okay, man, how is it that I can use this information to better myself? That's how I look at stuff now. None of it to me is good or bad or anything. It just is. And yeah, you're right. Like, I don't like the way that they do a lot of stuff, but then again, who cares what I want? Right? I mean, nobody does. I mean, I care what I want, but nobody else cares what I want. So why should I care about a government who's going to not care about what I want? That doesn't make any sense. I don't care about what they are going to say that they're going to do to try and make my life better. I'm like, okay, great, man, go for it. I'm going to go and figure it out for myself because I'm not going to have a reliance on you. Right? I have no expectations of the government doing the right thing, whatever that would be. Right? I have expectations of me doing the right thing. All right, let's see here. We got 232 people watching. We're 22 minutes into this. I see Lumberjack Landlord says, no mentor. Read and learn, made mistakes, but worked hard and figured it out. Are you talking about yourself? Yeah. That's how most people, I think, end up really doing it. You can get a good jump start by following those who have done it in the past. Having a good mentor, you can really shorten up the amount of time that it takes to get through the process of failing to learn, right? But still, ultimately, it's a matter of being in the game, right? Just participating. Let's see here. Government has made my life worse for 60 years. And see, that's not me. Like it's done the exact opposite for me because I haven't given it meaning that it's made my life worse. I don't believe that. Like I have, the government has not been the interference in my life at all, right? My understanding of what has happened has interfered, right? My understanding of New World Order, world governance, stuff like that has interfered in my life in the way that it has worsened my life. But that was the meaning that I was giving that stuff. Once I quit giving it that meaning, it didn't destroy my life anymore. I was actually able to use it to benefit my life. Weird, you know? All right, I stopped by that silver place you mentioned a couple of weeks ago in Arvada, Colorado, and showed him your video. He was thrilled. Well, right on, Jesse, man. That's great to hear. I'm glad that it was able to create a connection in that fashion. I know that, because that was the shop that my mom had stopped at, and she was very pleased with everybody there, thought she was treated very fairly and respectfully or whatever, the experience happened to be. She was very happy with it. So I figured, if they're treating my mom right, then, I can give them a shout out and show them a little love here on the channel. So I'm glad you actually went down there to the shop and enjoyed the experience yourself. All right, Lumberjack, 100%. If I didn't teach myself how to trade the last 5 years, I would never understood how to quickly capitalize on opportunity. Definitely agree with you guys. Right on, Nelson. That's great to hear, man. Yeah, Still no, yeah. I'm not sure the conversation that Lumberjack's having here, but it says you have no idea what will happen. Everyone said crash 2 years ago, still no crash. And I agree with that. Like, here's the thing. You can listen to a million people out there talk about what it is that they feel is going to be coming to the economy, coming to, crashes, coming to, exponential rises, whatever is going to happen out there. Nobody can predict the future, just like Matthew was saying there. What I definitely have learned is that there's a few positions that you need to move towards. Right? One of them is being industrious. You got to figure out some skills. You got to be useful in some way. You know, whether it's out here trying to share my thoughts and ideas of what is going on within the economy here on YouTube, starting a business where you're building houses or providing some sort of service. You got to be useful in some sort of way. You got to be industrious. Right? When you're industrious, then you can earn money. Now, the better you are at that, the more money you make. However, no matter how hard you work at that, you're going to be very limited to the hours that you work for somebody, to the amount of time that you can get on the job producing whatever it is you're doing. You're limited on how much it is that you can do unless you start hiring people and expanding your business out there. So now, being the business owner or being business minded, being industrious, that's like the key to it, right? Figuring out how to get that money in. But then you got to move from that, because you can't be industrious forever. You can only put in so many times for, hours in your time and all the other stuff. Eventually you have to step away from being the industrious person, and you have to be into a position in which that you are going to get passive income, meaning that you don't really have to work for it. You have to put some work to get it. But then once you have acquired that certain position, literally you can make money while you're sleeping. And now the way to do this is to be the property owner or a capitalist. Now, being a capitalist means like buying into stocks and bonds and moving your capital, right, your money, into a particular direction that is going to have a return. It's not necessarily the speculation. That's more of like a savings kind of thing when you move into gold or silver or Bitcoin or something of that nature. These aren't things that have a return in the sense of like a rental income or a dividend paying stock or a business that is growing. It's a speculation, meaning that you're intending to sell it for a higher price than what you had paid for it. And in that sense, it's good savings or good insurance in that sense, but not necessarily a good return on capital, or having that monthly income or passive income that's coming from it. That you get through rental properties, you get that through dividend paying stocks, you get that through the bond market, you get that in other ways. That's how you focus in on it. Like, however you get that done, right? You can get incredibly creative on how it is that you acquire these things. Me personally, being industrious means that I have a 9-to-5 job. I do these YouTube videos. I go out and call bingo. This is like my day job, right? This is how, or my daily income. This is how I make the money. Then I have to take that money, right? Obviously do my living expenses, but then hopefully have the extra money, whatever extra is, right? Then you have that other money that's beyond your living expenses that starts moving into those capital investments, into those properties, whatever it is that can start creating that passive income. And the more you do that, the more you can then become independent of the state or the people out there or a job or anything else like that. Being well diversified in those capital investments into many different properties, many rental incomes, many, stocks and bonds and stuff like that within the portfolio. This is what gives the stability to the people who have, who are not having to work, right? Like, they're just basically living independent. That is not hard to do. Like me just describing it, it's not that hard. It's step 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Not that hard. The hardest part is the discipline behind it. That's the hardest part, is being disciplined. To say, no, I'm not going to take the $300 that I'm not using to put towards bills or anything else, to not go party with that, but then to take that money and literally go and move it into those capital investments, into that property, into that kind of stuff. Once you do that and you start putting that money towards it, you actually start getting a thrill from it. You get the dopamine hit by investing. Like, this is almost like your new video game that you are playing. And you get excited about getting that next paycheck, lowering your expenses, and then moving that money into those capital investments. And every time you do that, you're getting more excited about watching this portfolio grow and feeling yourself and knowing that you're moving ever closer to that independence. It's not hard. It is hard, right? It's hard to do it, but it's not hard to understand how to do it. That part is easy. The discipline is hard. The actual work is somewhat hard. But the chance of you doing it is easy. Anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. Right? It's not that part anybody can do. All right, what time is it? All right, guys, I got literally like 2 minutes here. Let me go read these 2 super chats, and then I gotta get going back to work. Look forward to your speech at Zuber's event. Yeah, me too. I don't even know what I'm going to talk about, bro. I'm going to have to figure that out on the airplane ride down there or something. All right. Lumberjack, thank you so much for the $5, man. I really appreciate you. Yes, I do. How to buy, how to manage, how to operate. I retired at 46 based on how I built and ran my biz. UE helped. I watched to better understand. Yeah, and see, now this is the thing. Like, you know, I shared my thoughts and ideas on what's going on within the economy. People then took those ideas and then incorporated it into their own wants and desires and needs and businesses, right? Like, what it is that I'm doing in my life is different from what Matthew was doing, but Matthew took the information, was able to use it. Very much like his information, other people can use as well. And being in that symbiotic relationship of understanding that he was really good at his business. Like, to be able to pull it off and be to the level that he is at the age that he is, this is incredible. This is like what most people would want for their entire life, like, you know, beyond what most people would want for their life, right? And he was able to pull that off. That's the type of thing that I want in my life, right? I don't know if I necessarily want to do it the way he did it, but I definitely want to be in the energy of having that. And this is how you do it, is that you communicate and you start taking on the feelings and thoughts and capabilities of how it is that people are able to acquire these things. By being in that energy, you figure it out yourself, right? A lot of times it's trial and error, right? Failure is a good thing. Like, when you fail, you figure out what it is that you did wrong so you can do it better next time. All right, guys. I would love to sit here and keep going. We got David, who just joined the channel. Thank you so much for becoming a member. There's comments that are rolling through. I would love to sit out here and read them, but I got to go back to work. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.